Keep this handy because I'll need a little bit of soft clay. And this is just some soft clay there. Hasn't been drying much. So take one piece, that's going to be the bottom. I need my serrated edge tool. I need some slip. I have slip in this little container so I can squeeze it out. So what I'm going to do to attach all these pieces together is I'm going to score the surface where I attach all my pieces. So it's important to combine the clay together. You have to physically bond the two pieces of clay together. If I were to just wet this down and set this on here, it might stick, but chances are, and you know, you're probably talking about like 75% of the time, it wouldn't stay on there. So if we put some score marks on that surface and then put some slip on there, oops, squeezed a little bit too hard. And then put that on there. The slip fills in all those scratch marks I put on there, all those scoring. And what that'll do is when it sets up, it'll lock all that clay together. So then typically on the inside, what I do is right along this seam on the inside, is I take my wooden tool like that and I do a little scratching. I call this stitching. And this just helps mix those layers together. And then I smooth that down a little bit. And then with some of this soft clay, I'll roll out a thin little coil. And I'm going to push that in the seam right there. And then I blend that in just using the tip of my finger. And that's just an extra step to make sure that these pieces stay together. Some more stitching. Another coil. You want to blend that in there so that that coil you add in there just disappears into the surface of the clay. If you just kind of set it in there and you don't blend it in enough, it won't do much. And it could just pop out of there too. When the clay dries, you know, it could easily just come right out and then it's not really doing anything at all. All right, so now this piece has to fit here. And I want it to fit in between these two pieces. And the problem is that I cut this the same size as this. So when I put these on there, now they're in the way for that to fit in there. So I want this in between these two and sitting on my bottom piece. So that means I'm gonna have to trim some clay off of this to make it fit. So that's easy enough to do. You just kind of put it in place, let it hang over on one side, and then you just put a little mark on it. And then to make sure that this line and this line that I'm going to cut are parallel, I'm going to use my square. And it fits right in there. You know, a little adjusting, a little wiggle room, and that'll fit right there. So before I attach that in there, I want to see if it fits on the other side too. If I cut everything square, it should be the right size for the other side as well. So what I'm going to do is line these two up . See which way it fits better. I'm gonna mark that and then just cut that one off too. All right, so then to attach this, I have to score on the inside here. I've already scored this part here, but it never hurts to score it a little more. And that should fit right in there. So I gotta score the bottom. So make sure when you're scoring this that you're not mistaking this tool for the tool that kind of looks like it. There's two different tools that look like this. If I hold them up to the camera, hopefully you can see the difference. So this is the one I'm using for scoring, and you can see it has teeth on it. This one does not. So this one's going to leave those score marks that I want. The other one will not. So you got to use the serrated edge tool and put your slip on there. And remember, slip is just really wet clay. It's liquid clay. And most people just make their slip and they have it in some kind of container. You know, like a old yogurt container or something. And they just use a paintbrush to apply it wherever they want it. I put it in a squeezy bottle. Just makes it a little more convenient to work with. So then on the inside of this, now I have to do my stitching. So I got to do the bottom, just like I did on the other sides. It gets a little tricky when you start closing this off. But then I also have to do these corner seams. And when you do that, you got to support the outside as you work, so that as you push into it hard enough to do the stitching, you don't burst that seam open. So I always come back in and I smooth it down a little bit so that when I add that coil in there, there's no chance of me trapping any little air bubbles underneath the coil. And then when I put the coil in there, the coil is really wet, soft clay. But also because of the slip that I've already put in there, I shouldn't have to add any more slip to it. If I feel like it's not going to stick, I could always do that. All right, I spilled the slip here earlier, so I'm just going to use some of that and push it in there. And normally you don't have to do that, but just to show you, like, if it doesn't have some slip oozing out in that seam when you push it together where the coil's going to go, you might have to add a little bit of slip to it, but usually you don't have to. And because I'm going to blend this in to the surface, I'm kind of mixing the two clays together as I do that. So that's another way of blending the clay together. If I can mush the clay together as I blend it, it can bond those layers of clay together. So if you can see what I'm doing. Let's show you this inside there. So you can see on this side and around the bottom, I've got a coil in there, but you can see going down this side, there isn't a coil yet. I don't know if you can see that or not, but that's what you got to do. So if I'm making, something that's really sculptural and, it's going to be an enclosed form, there's a few things that you have to take into consideration. One is you don't have to spend a whole bunch of time making the inside look pretty if you're not going to see the inside of it. The other thing is if you close it off, we don't want to trap any air anywhere. The air will seep out of the clay. It'll seep out between the clay particles. But it takes time. So when we stick this in the kiln, we want to be able to fire it fast enough that we don't have to worry about that. So it always has to have some kind of vent hole. It will build up some pressure inside there if it's a contained space, a closed space. As that air heats up, it creates pressure. And it's kind of like overinflating a balloon. Eventually it's going to pop once the pressure inside is too great. So we have to vent it in order to let the air out. And it's partially the air, but it's mostly the moisture that's contained in air is the problem. Moisture expands quite a bit. And if there's moisture trapped inside of your project, when you fire it, if we don't give it enough time heating up, to bake all that water out of the clay, when it goes past the boiling point, the water will start to turn to steam. So it's expanding greatly. And when you have that expansion happen, it can make your project explode. Which is bad for a couple of reasons. One, you put a lot of time and energy into this. You don't want it to explode, because if it explodes, there's usually no fixing it. And, you probably don't want to be doing your projects over again. But also, if it explodes, there's a potential for it to explode violently inside the kiln. And if it explodes violently, that means it's sending shrapnel around the inside of the kiln. And that shrapnel can hit other people's projects and wreck their projects as well. I just got to stitch these last few seams here. Smooth it a little bit. Run a coil around the inside there. So slab building is something that I do a lot, and I'll show you eventually some of the things that I do. But just as an example of something that's pretty easy to make, I can build a box, but you can see how you could expand on this. This is just a basic form. You know, I could turn this into a lidded box. I could keep building on it. It could become something else. I could cut openings into the outside. You know, maybe turn it into a candle holder or something. But there's a lot of possibilities. Alright, so the inside's pretty much together. Wouldn't call it done, so I'm going to go in and refine all that. Because I'll probably have this open at the top, and if you can see inside of it, I want it to look good inside of there.